The space race, though seen as insignificant by most historians, was the turning point of the Cold War. Not only did it restore American confidence, but it proved the power of the United States of America and changed the world forever.
Today, a new moon is in the sky, a 23-inch metal sphere placed in orbit by a Russian rocket.
October 4th, 1957. The Soviet Union has launched Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite. Its radio signals could be picked up by almost anyone, including amateurs. It wasn't important how powerful it was, what matters was that they did it, and before the United States.
Counterbalancing the pull of gravity and released. One of the great scientific feats of the age.
Sputnik marked something terrifying for the United States. With the launch of this satellite, it proved the Soviet Union's capability to launch intercontinental ballistic missiles, potentially allowing them to attack the United States. But before I mention why the United States would even be afraid of this, I should probably explain some history. After World War II, both the Soviet Union and the United States realized how important rockets were, and both decided to focus on rocket technology in order to expand their military power. Years after they began research, there began to be some tensions between the two former allies. Communism and capitalism don't really mix that well. Which is why when on March 5th, 1946, when Winston Churchill gave his famous anti-communism speech, in which he addressed the Iron Curtain in the Soviet sphere, the Soviet Union unveiled its Zenov Doctrine. This doctrine stated that America was plaguing the earth with its imperialism, and they were going to stop them. The Soviets developed nuclear weapons in 1949, and the war became very threatening. The civilians were terrified. Thousands of political cartoons were released, many of them claiming that America is finally going to die. Now you can probably see why the launch of Sputnik into orbit was kind of a huge deal. Right, so we have a bit of a problem now. Our enemy, capable of bombing us across the ocean, who also have nuclear missiles, now we essentially control space. This instills fear into the American citizens everywhere, because their lives are even more at risk. President Eisenhower sees only one thing fit: to get the public involved, and start a space program of our own. His bold attempt at winning back the public's opinion in favor was incredibly risky, because they already started to lose faith in the United States. To compromise the conflict of the Cold War, President Eisenhower joined the space race. On October 5th, 1957, just 5 days after the launch of Sputnik, Eisenhower found himself in a conference where he informs the public all of his plans in order to calm them down. He tells the people that the Soviets cannot be trusted and their claims could very well be false. He also stated his plans for creating his own space program. He says, "Before the end of the calendar year 1958, we have put a vehicle in the air with the maximum ability that we can devise for obtaining the kind of scientific information that I have stated." He also said, "The satellite that we are planning to put in the air will certainly provide much more information if it operates successfully throughout. According to plan, it will provide much more information than Sputnik." The public was at ease. Many skeptics still thought that the Soviets had an enormous scientific advantage, but the plans had been made to race the Soviets. All that was left was actually following through and putting the satellite in space. This wasn't the first attempt at easing the public opinions, however. In 1954, Congress enacted the Communist Control Act. This act was an attempt to deal with communism in the United States during the Cold War. It didn't have an impact on communists as much as it had an impact on citizens who were worried about communists. Both of these attempts to restore public image of the United States had a good amount of success to continue throughout the war. But then, on November 3rd, 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik 2, a much heavier satellite that was more powerful than the first, and again, they did it before the United States could. It almost seems that the main objective of the Soviets was to utilize space to instill fear into the American people, and many thought this advance in rocket technology would allow the Soviets to build a military base in space. Conference talks and public messages weren't going to keep the American people calm forever, and the United States knew they had to act fast. On July 28, 1958, NASA was founded. The funds were established, and the production of rockets and advanced technology boomed. This wasn't, however, until after the U.S. Army funded the Explorer 1, the first American satellite, on January 31, 1958. America was now in the space race, in the midst of the Cold War, fighting for the popular vote of the American people. Many other achievements for both the Soviets and the Americans would arise between 1958 and 1970, including many manned space flights, putting animals into space, adding more satellites, and ultimately putting a man onto the moon. On July 20th, 1969, America effectively ended the space race. While the Cold War and no casualties, had no shots fired, and no nukes launched, the effects of the space race were enormous. So no, the space race wasn't pointless. We were left with tremendous research about the moon and its origins. We have several satellites from several countries orbiting the Earth and Mars. We have the International Space Station orbiting the Earth, allowing modern research to take place. We have NASA, and a stronger military because of the scientific advances made in the short 12-year span. The Soviet Union fell in 1991, and America is now better than it ever was.